So, couple of days ago, I stated that I was going to talk about dominant Stanley Cup champions. And I decided that in order to do this, there are a few different ways to look at it. So I'm going to do this as a countdown kind of thing, a couple of different ways. And the first way to look at it is record. So who had the best record on their way to the Stanley Cup? And I also included in that, because there's going to be a lot of teams with the same record, who played the fewest amount of overtimes to get to those 16 wins. So who was the most dominant? Who can you look at and say, really, we can't argue that they were a great Stanley Cup champion? And who can we look at and go, well, yeah, but they got some luck in overtime. And there's one team in particular that had a lot of luck in overtime because they had the greatest goaltender of all time there. But I'll get into that. Now, there is another way to talk about this, which is the greatest Stanley Cup champions. Now, I think to measure greatest Stanley Cup champions gets a little bit tougher. Now, the NHL had this vote, of course, for the 100th anniversary, right, where every Joe Schmo could vote as many times as they wanted on who was the greatest champion. Button mashing doesn't tell me who the greatest champion is, so I ignored it. The measuring of who the most amazing Stanley Cup champion is a little more difficult. So I'm just going to do the dominant ones. This is going to be a bit of a longer video, so go ahead, grab yourself a drink, sit back, and get ready for this. This is, again, just their record and the amount of overtime. So there are going to be teams that are tied with each other, but not as many as I thought there might be when I started this. I thought there might be a lot of ties, and there really isn't. All right, coming in last place, so I'm going to do the countdown from last through first. And we're going by year, record, and the amount of times they won in overtime. So the year is 2014. The record was 16-10, and they went to overtime 7 times. So the least dominant Cup champion from 1980 through 2018. Yes, I included this year's 2018 Capitals. And I went back to 1980 because that's when they brought in the preliminary round as an actual best of 16 rather than what it was before 1980. So yeah, you're going to notice that parity has made it more difficult to win a Stanley Cup now than it used to be. Next up, Carolina, who in 2006 posted a 16-9 record. And they also went to overtime 7 times. So it's a nice, neat, clean way to figure this out. And proving that I didn't rig this to make my teams look better. Here you go. The 2011 Stanley Cup champion, Boston Bruins. Also 16-9. And they went to overtime 5 times. So when I see it the way I see it, and you know, I think it works relatively well. I do. Next up, and as I said, you're going to notice a lot of recent Stanley Cup champions towards the bottom of this list because, quite honestly, it is getting more and more difficult to just go on this magical run to the Stanley Cup. The Penguins last year went 16-9. They went to overtime 4 times. So that makes them a more dominant champion than Boston or Carolina. And next up, also Pittsburgh, who in 2017 went 16-8 and went to overtime 7 times. So again, 2016. It's 2016, Shannon. Come on. 2016. See, and you guys will still see a 7. See how much fun that is? I can do whatever I want. All right, I'll go ahead and erase it. Because otherwise people are going to look at that and they're going to be like, I still see the 7. I still see the 7. Next up, going back before the salary cap, this is the first team pre-salary cap that's shown up. Nope, they didn't go 8 times. Come on, Shannon. 2003, they were 16-8. They went to overtime 6 times, making them mildly more dominant. Showing up next on the list, the Capitals of this year. So again, it's getting more and more difficult for teams to come out of the playoffs with less than 8 losses. And they went to overtime 5 times, 4 of which were in the first round, and none of them in the third and fourth rounds. So they got better as it went along. They had a more convincing way of winning in the third and fourth round than they had in the first and second. Next up, I will say this: the Pittsburgh Penguins know how to make it interesting. So the Penguins are really excellent at winning game sevens, winning close series. This time, 16-8, they had 4 overtime wins, and that's 2009. Or 4 overtime games. I'm not measuring overtime wins. Overtime games. So again, Pittsburgh knows how to make it interesting. Speaking of Pittsburgh. And before Penguins fans get really angry, this is the last time you're going to see Penguins on here for a while. They were also 16-8 that year and went to overtime 3 times. So the Penguins, when they win the Stanley Cup, 3 out of the 5 times they've been 16-8. Last year they were 16-9, and they had a better record in 1992. But that's one of those interesting things you look at and you go, oh, that's kind of weird. The Pittsburghs all lumped in together like that. But they have a way of making series interesting. Next up. Again, proving that I didn't make this so that my teams look better. Dallas shows up next. They were 16-7. There's a bunch of teams at 16-7. I'm just going to throw that out there right now. They went to overtime 8 times. 8 overtime games, which is why they are where they are. Next up. We're going to get into a tie pretty quick here, too. Okay, so next up is Chicago. The 2013 Hawks, 16-7, to the surprise of no one. 7 overtime games. And now we're into a tie. So what I'll do with the tie, I'm trying to put this in chronological order. Yeah. All right. So the Detroit Red Wings in 2002, the Avalanche in 2001 were both 16-7, and they both went to overtime 6 times. So back-to-back years, and again, notice a lot of 2000s, because there is more parity now than there used to be. And that started before the whole lockout and let's get rid of the season and crazy. I've got another tie here. So again, because there's a lot of teams that went 16-7, the Blackhawks of 2015, Tampa Bay 2004, both 16-7. And they both went to overtime 5 times. This is when people are like this that doesn't tell. I don't think no. I'm just pointing out by schedule and by overtime the dominance. The New York Rangers show up next on the board. 1994, 16-7, went to overtime 4 times. Next up, the New Jersey Devils that's 1995, right? It's the 2000. 2000 New Jersey Devils, 16-7, went to overtime twice. Twice they needed to do overtime. That's it. And I realize my writing tends to go up at the end, but I blame that on being left-handed. I don't care if that's the thing. It doesn't really matter. Next up, the New York Islanders. Yeah, the Islanders are finally on the board. 1980. Now, I mentioned that the first round was best of 5. So they were 15-6 that year. Went to overtime 7 times. It was the least dominant performance they had, and that was their first Stanley Cup. I got a lot more dominant after that. A lot. Next up. Yep. Just double checking before I do this. The 1996 Colorado Avalanche, who were 16-6, and went to overtime 7 times. So there's about the first half. I think we're actually a little bit past the first half. Next up, Calgary. You guys remember years? 1989. Record. I said there was going to be a lot of 16-7s. There's a lot of 16-6s as well. Overtime, 5 times. So Calgary comes in there. And this is where it kind of, there's a certain couple of logos you're going to be seeing a lot of from here. This is one of them. The Edmonton Oilers, 1990, 16-6 as well. Went to overtime 4 times. So the Oilers are mildly more dominant than Calgary on this board. When I get into greatest, and we'll do greatest at some point soon, I can't see Calgary being below the 1990 Edmonton Oilers. I just can't. Next up, the 2010 Chicago Blackhawks, who were also 16-6, 4 overtimes. Right above them, the Detroit Red Wings of 1998, 16-6, and 3 overtimes. So I like the way this worked out. I really do. I looked at this list. I was like, all right, I'm going to try this, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, well, just scrap it. There's a lot of video ideas I've had that I've just scrapped after I've got a whole page of information. I forget it and throw it away. The Red Wings on the board again. 2008, 16-6, go to overtime twice. Dominant record by those 2008 Detroit Red Wings too. Next up, Montreal. That's got to make Montreal fans feel good. Like, yeah, we were better than all those teams. We were so much better. They were 15-5, 4 overtimes. So 1 less win because you needed 1 less win to get to the Stanley Cup at the time. And yet, still pretty dominant. But speaking of dominant, this was quite the run. 1983. So we're back to the 80s again. Same record, 15-5. 0 overtimes. And I had to double check that. They never went to overtime. All 15 games they won in regulation. They lost 5 in regulation. There was no messing around with the 1983 New York Islanders because they were tired. This was their 4th straight Stanley Cup. They were tired. There's no time for overtime. Just lose it or win it in regulation. Number 12. And I was actually surprised to see these guys this high up. I was. It's easy to forget just how dominant this run was. But it was pretty impressive, and it would be wrong not to mention how impressive it was. 2007, Anaheim Ducks, who were 16-5, 5 overtimes. So the Ducks are pretty high up on this countdown. Next up, yes, Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh shows up again. This is their last Stanley Cup on the board. They were, I believe, also 16-5. Yes. Don't change numbers, Shannon, because people will see the number you wrote up first, and it'll drive them crazy. 16-5, 3 overtime games. Next up, I told you you'd be seeing a lot of this logo. And there it is again. The Edmonton Oilers of... Which one's first here? 1987. 16-5. 2 overtime games. Keep in mind that this year in the finals, there was a big deal made about how Vegas only lost 5 games on the way to the final. Back in the 80s, that's standard. Number 9. Hey, look, it's the Islanders again. So we're at 1982. They were 15-4. And they had 5 overtime games. Number 7. No, number 8. Not that matters. I'm not even telling you guys the countdown. I was like, I'm not going to do the numbers on the board because that's just, forget it. 1984, 15-4, and 3 overtime games. So again, the Oilers, anxious to get things over with, only 3 games made it to overtime. Number 7, and this is the remarkable one. This is really quite remarkable. And I take a lot of heat for my unwillingness to budge on Patrick Roy being the greatest goaltender of all time. I won't budge. That's 11 Stanley Cup games that went to overtime, and they won 10 of them. They lost the first, they won the next 10. They won 16 out of 20 games on their way to the Stanley Cup. That was an insane run. And I've never seen anything like it since. It's never happened since. Or I don't think it had ever happened before either. I think 10 was the record, and 10's still the record. Just an insane run by Montreal. So they go to overtime 11 times, but because they only lost 4 games, they're still one of the more dominant teams. So I like how this worked out. I really do. Next up, Kings. So I talked about how there's been more parity and things have been closer. Not always. That's 2012, right? Yeah, that's 2012. I don't know why I wrote down 2014. It's too many numbers is what it is. It's just, my brain just says, yeah, just write the same thing. Just, I don't care. 16-4, and they go to overtime 4 times. That's crazy. Now, at this point in the countdown, having a tie may seem kind of odd, but we have one. I'll put Detroit first, because it doesn't matter. Detroit in 97, New Jersey in 95. And they both went 16-4. And 3 of their games went to overtime. Crazy. Number 3. Told you guys you'd see this one again. The Edmonton Oilers in 1985 went 15-3. I'm so used to writing 16, I forgot. I'm a really bad Bob Ross now. Whoops. There are no happy accidents, just mistakes. 15-3, 2 overtimes in that one. And number 2, people know where this is going. The 1981 New York Islanders went 15-3. 1 game went to overtime. 1. And then last but not least, again, people know where this is going, 1988. Clayton, if you're watching this, yes. This is why I'm doing this video. We were playing street hockey in Coquitlam, and he asked me, do you think anybody will ever beat the 16-2 record of the Edmonton Oilers in 1988? And I just said no. I didn't even hesitate, just no. And this is why. You look over the last 10 years, LA's the closest with 4. So if you're looking for teams in the last 10 years and losses that have been close, LA with 4. Anaheim's more than 10 years now. Detroit's 10 years at 6. Chicago had 6. It gets more and more difficult to make it to the Stanley Cup and win it. Or, conversely, these Oilers and Islanders dynasties were really kind of awesome. So there you go. Nice long video to start your day. Again, I had no idea how long this would take. It's one of those things where I started, I'm like, it takes as long as it takes. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Yes, I will measure Stanley Cup champions by strength of schedule and do a whole other countdown all over again. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.